Okay, welcome to our presentation today for ARES 2021, part of the International Workshop on Security Privacy in Intelligent Infrastructures. So we're really happy to be able to give this presentation as part of this workshop in ARES. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this workshop, Lucas Molina from Czech Republic and Ramandas from University of Tartu in Estonia. So much appreciated to give us the opportunity to present our work at this workshop. So being part of this workshop myself, I understand that we have a very interesting set of keynotes and presentations. So I'm really excited to be part of this workshop this year. So our contribution to the workshop is a paper entitled Machine Learning Driven Threat Intelligence System for Malicious URL Detection. And my co-authors on this paper are Rupa, Sweta, and then two of my research associates, Praveen and Thippa. And so today I'll be talking about our work in this area. So let's start off with a brief introduction to the content of my talk. And start with a few points related to our overview or within our abstract, and then I'm going to talk about objectives of our work. I'm going to give a brief literature survey, talk about how we did data collection, and then talk about our methodology for malicious URL detection, and then talk about the modules we used, and then conclude the paper, and then talk about some future work. So that's the overview of our talk. To give a brief introduction into our topic, what I can say to you is that malicious websites, so basically websites that try to prey on people that visit them, predominantly try to promote growth of criminal activities. So by getting personal information or trying to install information collecting tools on your own computer, try to perpetuate criminal activities through that. And so this paper here and our proposed framework try to analyze one of the methods by which we might be able to prevent that, and that is basically trying to study the URLs. So basic properties or basic common faults in URLs. URLs, if you don't know, Uniform Resource Locator, basically the website names that appear when we type in to go to any website. So looking at the properties of those URLs, we may be able to better detect malicious websites. And so ideally, we want to be able to do this in real time. And so with as little latency as possible, if some sort of website appears to be malicious, we want to be able to detect it and basically thwart any attempt to access such sites. And so our objectives here is to basically analyze possible attacks on URLs and be able to detect malicious URLs, apply machine learning techniques and classification to be able to basically detect these malicious links. And then lastly, basically to find out malicious links from the host-based and lexical features of the URL. So lexical features in layman's terms basically look at the language properties that kind of go into URL forming and see if we can help detect malicious URLs through that. So some of the papers and kind of the references here, the numbers are coming from the paper itself. So I encourage you to look at that within the paper. So basically, the author Manjari proposed a model that demonstrates the process of identifying a phishing URL. So these are URLs used to phish information out of users. And they did this in this paper using basically metadata analysis. And so they use some machine learning techniques, random forest, and support vector machine applied to data sets of URLs to try to detect these, metadata phishing URLs. The limitation of this work was basically it was difficult in large scale implementation. So basically being able to study large amounts of URLs due to the complexity of the algorithm. So as we started to analyze more URLs through this technique, we saw that the complexity of the problem kind of blew up. So in another paper, Khan proposed a model that involved feature selection pertinent to malicious spam detection in email. So being able to detect emails that are spam. And so the objective here was to optimize classification parameters, and their model primarily aimed to enhance detection of malicious spams through extensive feature selection, emphasizing on reduction in training time. A limitation here was basically the implementation consumed too much time to basically give results. And so in a real-time environment where you're trying to detect spam on the fly or you're trying to detect URLs on the fly, it just wasn't feasible. And so looking at some of the other references here, a lot of them were looking for specific attributes in either URLs or in spam emails. Their feature extraction used a bunch of different techniques. Keyword, lexical, URL were some of the techniques. As far as classification and machine learning, you can see here that they used a bunch of different techniques. They didn't give any statistic analysis. And so you can see on the bottom line here how our work kind of differs. Instead of using specific attributes, we're using more general, generic attributes. Instead of focusing on, say, lexical or URL or keyword, we're trying to combine all of those into one. From a classification perspective, we're using a bunch of different techniques, and we do give statistical analysis of the proposed work. So data collection. And so data collection in this field is fairly interesting. We can use basically a URL data set with 22 different attributes. And the attributes, I mean, vary in features, basically number of dots, length of URL, host name, number of domains, etc. Details are in the paper. All URLs are characterized by multiple attributes, and each is classified as either benign or malicious. So we basically want to take our URL data set, analyze the features in a general context, and be able to, classify it into one of the two categories. And so when we're testing URLs, we want to test different types of URLs. So some that don't have the HTTP out in front, others that do, others that are secure, others that aren't. So those are basically ways that we test our data set. As far as methodology goes, this diagram here is right out of our paper. Details are in the paper. I'm going to skip the details here just from time constraints, as I only have 15 minutes to get through my entire presentation. And so here, as far as the different modules that we use a verification process, basically to verify the URL, an extraction process, and then assumptions while creating the decision tree, and then attribute selection measures. Okay. And so those are the four attributes that I need to talk about next. So verification, extraction, assumptions, and attribute selection. So in the verification process, a URL is collected as an input from the user and fed into the application. A dataset contains phishing URLs, benign URLs, and the relevant class labels. So this is basically what would be considered training. The taken URL is validated against the URL in the data set, and a class label is assigned where similarity is found. If the class label is yes, then the output is considered being malicious. Otherwise, it is labeled as no. And so if the given URL is not found in the data set, we perform a feature extraction process to be able to assign a benign or malicious classification on that URL. So in the extraction process then, three types of extraction processes are applied. Again, before we talked about our methodology and how the papers that we'd looked at so far either follow lexical, URL, or other. And so here we're basically combining all of those together to get that. Our algorithm is given in the paper. In algorithm 1, where basically we try to do the lexical part and the URL feature extraction all in one. And so you kind of see that in algorithm one. Assumptions while creating the decision tree. So when we're creating the decision tree, we have to make some assumptions. Most of the time when you're doing decision trees, you would have to make some assumptions anyway. And so those are given here. Basically, initially, the entire training data set is considered as the root. And then from there, the values of the features are chosen as categorical. We convert instances of continuous values into discrete form prior to building of the model. And so that's the key there. When we're selecting attributes, which was the third part of our modules, we use information gain and gain ratio. These are standard calculations that we can apply. And so the information gain and the gain ratio calculate the purity of the partition where the Gini index finds the impurity. And so these are some techniques pretty standard in the field of attribute selection measures. As far as results go that we gained, this is not overly clear, but you can see the tested URL on the left here. And you can see, so for example, like Google came out as benign. Google.com with the HTTP also came out as benign. However, this one here, even though it may look okay, it came out as malicious. And Fish Tank, even though it has the word phishing in it, also is not a malicious site, and it came out as benign. So from our performance analysis, we did a comparative analysis into some state-of-the-art works that kind of focus on malicious URL detection. And you can see here from our green line, as far as supportability and scalability, we were better than all of the other compared methods. However, in response time and fault tolerance, we weren't the worst, but we weren't the best either. So you can see that the response time, two works were better than ours. So we kind of find ourselves in the middle. Whereas fault tolerance, we were just slightly better than the best one, which was Yang et al.'s work. And so in conclusion, our study here proposes a system for identifying compromised URLs using a random forest classifier. The system constitutes a framework for phishing detection that adapts new attacks, quickly eliminating possibilities of overfitting, which is experienced in case of traditional decision trees. And so the random forest that we implemented for the classification of suspected URL detection actually performed quite well. And you can kind of see it here from these figures and table that were extracted from the paper itself. And so as far as future work goes, we would want to involve working on several other features of URLs, such as the presence of executable files, and be able to detect based on that. And then the framework should also in future involve developing a web application to allow people to basically either dump data sets into our web application for detection, or to be able to run on the cloud in sync with other applications that are running or pulling information from URLs to allow URLs that are being used or inputted into applications to detect whether these are phishing URLs or not. And so that would be an interesting future work of this paper. So that's all I have for now. I'll be available for questions after my video is played as part of the workshop. So I look forward to seeing you in person then and answering any questions that you may have. So I'd like to thank you at this time, and I look forward to mingling with you during the actual workshop. Thank you.